Hi there! Thank you so much for watching. We're about to start, but real quick, if you haven't already, please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this story. I'm Sadie Monroe, 28 years old, pediatric nurse at a small hospital outside Columbus, Ohio. I live alone in the house where I grew up, the same house where I watched my mother take her last breath in a hospital bed we'd set up by the living room window so she could see the cardinals at the bird feeder one last time. I need you to understand something about me before I tell you what happened. I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts. I don't watch horror movies because they feel manipulative and fake. I don't read horoscopes or believe in psychics. I double-check that my doors are locked every single night before bed, and I keep a baseball bat beside my nightstand. Not because I'm paranoid, but because I'm practical. I've always been the practical one. So, when I tell you that at 2:07 in the morning on a Thursday in late February, my phone rang and my dead mother's name flashed across the screen, I need you to believe me when I say I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't having some kind of grief-induced breakdown 3 years after burying her. I was wide awake, standing in my dark hallway, staring through the peephole at a woman wearing the gray cardigan my mother was buried in. And when she spoke through the door, she said something that only my mother could possibly know, something I'd never told another living soul. I know how this sounds. I know you're already forming explanations in your mind. A scam caller who did research, a cruel prank by someone who hated me, my own grief playing elaborate tricks after working too many double shifts. I thought all of those things too. I desperately wanted to believe any rational explanation. But none of them could account for what she said next. The night it happened, I just finished a brutal 16-hour shift at the hospital. We were short-staffed that week. We're always short-staffed, but that particular week felt worse than usual. 2 nurses had called in sick, and we had a 6-year-old boy in the ICU who wasn't doing well. I spent most of my shift sitting beside his bed, holding his small hand, telling him stories about superheroes, while his parents took turns crying in the hallway outside. By the time I finally clocked out, it was nearly midnight. The drive home took 20 minutes through empty streets, and I don't remember most of it. I was running on coffee and adrenaline and the overwhelming need to collapse into my bed. The house was completely dark when I pulled into the driveway. I'd left the porch light on that morning like I always did, but the bulb must have burned out sometime during the day. I made a mental note to replace it tomorrow and immediately forgot. I didn't bother turning on lights when I walked inside. I knew every inch of that house better than I knew my own reflection. I could walk from the front door to my bedroom with my eyes closed, had been doing it since I was 5 years old. The house still smelled like her sometimes. My mother, Renata Monroe. She wore this specific lavender lotion every single day, the kind you could only get at one small shop downtown, and even though she'd been gone for 3 years, I swear I could still catch hints of it lingering in certain rooms. The bathroom, the kitchen, her old bedroom, which I still hadn't cleaned out properly. I kept telling myself I'd get to it eventually, but eventually never seemed to arrive. My mom raised me alone after my father left when I was 12. His name was Dean, and I don't talk about him much because honestly, there isn't much worth saying. One day he was there, and the next day he wasn't. He didn't leave a note. He didn't call to explain his reasons. He just packed a duffel bag while I was at school and disappeared like smoke. My mom came home from work that afternoon and found half the closet empty. She sat on the edge of their bed for a long time, just staring at the space where his clothes used to hang. I watched her from the doorway, too scared to speak or move or make any sound that might shatter whatever she was feeling. She never cried about it, at least not where I could see. She just got up the next morning and made me breakfast like nothing catastrophic had happened. Scrambled eggs and toast, same as always. When I finally worked up the courage to ask where Dad was, she looked at me with those calm, impossibly steady eyes and said simply, "It's just us now, sweetheart, but that's okay. We're going to be just fine." And we were. We genuinely were fine. My mom worked as a seamstress, doing alterations at a dry cleaner downtown, hemming pants and taking in wedding dresses and fixing broken zippers on winter coats. The work wasn't glamorous, and it definitely didn't pay well, but she was exceptionally good at it. Her hands were always moving, always busy with something. Even when she watched television at night, she'd have some piece of fabric in her lap, stitching away at repairs or projects. We had our routines, the two of us. Sunday mornings were sacred pancake time. She made them from scratch, with fresh blueberries when they were in season. Friday nights belonged to old movies. She loved anything with Audrey Hepburn, could recite half the dialogue from memory. We'd curl up on the couch with a giant bowl of popcorn between us, and she'd whisper the lines a split second before the actors said them, making me laugh every time. And every single night before I went to bed, no matter how old I got, she'd say the same thing, the same phrase that became ours alone. "I love you to the spoon and back." It started when I was 7 years old. I'd been trying to say the normal phrase, "I love you to the moon and back," but I messed up the words, got them tangled in my tired brain, and said spoon instead of moon. My mother laughed so hard at my mistake that she had to sit down on the floor, tears streaming down her face from pure joy. After that, it became our private joke, our secret language that nobody else understood. She wrote it in every birthday card. She said it at the end of every phone call, no matter how brief. When I graduated from nursing school, exhausted and proud and terrified of the future, she handed me a small gift box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a real silver spoon with my name engraved on the handle. I cried harder than I'd ever cried in my entire life. The last time I heard those words was 3 years ago, in the living room of this house, about 6 hours before she died. She was so weak by then, so impossibly fragile. The cancer had spread everywhere the doctors could look, and they'd finally admitted there was nothing left to do except keep her comfortable and wait. We'd brought in a hospital bed and positioned it carefully by the window so she could watch the bird feeder in the front yard. She loved watching the cardinals. Used to say they reminded her of her own mother, my grandmother, who died long before I was born. I was sitting in the chair beside her bed, holding her hand, when she opened her eyes and looked directly at me. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, so quiet I had to lean in close to hear. "Sadie." "I'm here, Mom," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm right here." She smiled, just the smallest lift at the corners of her mouth. "To the spoon and back, baby." Those were her last words to me. She closed her eyes after that and never opened them again. Her breathing grew slower and slower until finally it just stopped, like a clock winding down to nothing. I thought I'd never hear that phrase again, thought it had died with her, locked away permanently in memories that only I could access. I was completely wrong. That night, after my brutal shift, I went to bed around 12:30. Didn't eat dinner, didn't check my phone, didn't do anything except kick off my shoes and pull the blanket over my head, letting exhaustion drag me down into darkness. I didn't dream. I never dream when I'm that bone tired. There's just nothing heavy and thick, like sinking into deep water with no bottom. At 2:07 in the morning, my phone rang. The sound cut through sleep like a knife through fabric. I'm not the kind of person who can sleep through phone calls anymore. Working at a hospital trained that response out of me years ago. When your phone rings in the middle of the night, it usually means someone is dying, or dead, or about to be. I reached for my phone on the nightstand without fully opening my eyes, fingers fumbling in the dark. On the second try, I found it and pulled it toward my face, squinting at the impossibly bright screen. For several long seconds, my brain absolutely could not process what I was seeing. The name on the screen said, Mom. Not Mom, old number, or Mom's phone, like some people save contacts after someone dies, keeping them as digital memorials. Just Mom. Exactly the way I'd saved it when I got my first cell phone at 16. I stared at that name for what felt like a full minute while the phone kept ringing, vibrating in my hand like something alive trying to escape. I knew I should answer it. I knew I should do something besides freeze completely, but my body refused to cooperate. It was like being trapped in that horrible space between sleeping and waking where nothing feels entirely real. The call went to voicemail. The screen went dark. I sat there in the silence of my bedroom, heart pounding so violently I could feel it hammering in my throat. I told myself firmly it was just a glitch. Phone companies recycled old numbers all the time. Some random stranger had been assigned my mother's old number and accidentally called me. That was the only explanation that made any sense. The only explanation I was willing to accept. I was about to set the phone back down and try desperately to convince myself to sleep when it rang again. Same name, same number, Mom. This time, my thumb moved before my brain could stop it. I answered. I didn't say anything at first, just held the phone against my ear and listened with my entire body tensed. There was silence on the other end, but not the empty silence of a dead line or wrong number. It was the kind of silence that meant someone was definitely there, waiting, breathing. Then I heard her voice. Sadie, sweetie, it's Mom. My entire body went cold, like someone had dumped ice water directly into my veins. It wasn't just that the voice sounded similar to hers. It was her, the exact tone she used when she called me during my lunch breaks at work. The slight rasp that had developed in her throat during the final year of her life when the cancer started affecting everything. The way she stretched out the word sweetie, turning it into something warm and gentle and uniquely hers. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except sit frozen in my dark bedroom, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles started aching. Baby, I'm outside, the voice continued calmly. It's so cold out here tonight. Can you please let me in? I hung up. Didn't consciously decide to do it. My thumb just moved on its own, ending the call like some survival instinct was trying to protect me from something my rational brain couldn't handle. I dropped the phone on the bed and pressed both hands hard against my face. I was shaking violently. My teeth were actually chattering, even though the room wasn't cold at all. I told myself desperately that I was dreaming, had to be dreaming. This was some kind of stress-induced nightmare brought on by exhaustion and the approaching anniversary of her death, which was only 4 days away. Any second now, I would wake up for real and everything would return to normal. But I could feel the cotton sheets against my bare legs, could hear the old radiator clanking in the corner. Every detail was too sharp, too present, too impossibly solid to be a dream. Maybe 30 seconds passed, maybe a full minute, and then I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. Knock, knock, knock. Perfectly spaced, patient, and unhurried. Exactly the way my mother always knocked when she came home from work or stopped by to visit. She never used the doorbell. Said doorbells were impersonal and jarring. She always knocked exactly 3 times, slow and steady, like she had all the time in the world. I got out of bed. I have no logical explanation for why. Every horror movie I'd ever reluctantly watched told me to stay exactly where I was, to call the police immediately, to hide under the covers like a terrified child. But something pulled me forward anyway, some desperate combination of fear and impossible, irrational hope that I couldn't control or resist. The hallway stretched out dark and empty before me. I didn't turn on any lights, just walked toward the front door like I was moving through deep water. Each step felt heavy and slow and inevitable. The brass peephole glinted faintly in the dim light coming through the living room window from the streetlight outside. My mother had installed that peephole herself when I was 15, right after a stranger came to our door asking for money and scared us both badly. I pressed my eye against the small opening and looked outside. She was standing on the porch, bathed in the yellow glow of the streetlight at the end of our driveway. Gray cardigan, silver hair pinned back exactly the way she always wore it. Hands clasped patiently in front of her body. Just standing there, calm and still. My mother, 3 years dead, standing on my front porch at 2 a.m, waiting for me to let her in. I backed away from the door so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My shoulder slammed into the wall behind me, and I stood there pressed against it, breathing in short, shallow gasps that wouldn't quite fill my lungs. Tears were building behind my eyes, though I wasn't entirely sure why I wanted to cry. My mind raced frantically through every possible explanation. A twin sister my mother never mentioned, some elaborate, cruel prank orchestrated by someone who inexplicably hated me, a complete mental breakdown brought on by stress and exhaustion and grief. None of these explanations made any sense, but neither did anything else currently happening. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands and scrolled desperately through my contacts until I found Aunt Delia, my mother's younger sister. She lived about 20 minutes away in a small apartment complex near the highway. She and my mom had been extremely close, talking on the phone almost daily until the cancer made conversation too exhausting. After my mom died, Delia checked on me constantly, bringing casseroles I couldn't eat and offering company I wasn't ready for. I'd pushed her away more than I should have, but she never stopped trying. I pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear with trembling hands. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice thick with sleep and confusion. "Sadie, what's wrong? It's the middle of the night." I tried desperately to keep my voice steady, but it came out as a whisper. "Someone's at my door. They look exactly like Mom." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear Delia shifting, probably sitting up in bed. "What do you mean they look like your mom? Sadie, you're scaring me." I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen through that peephole. Didn't have adequate words for something so impossible. "I don't know what's happening. I got a phone call from her old number. Her voice was on the line. And now someone who looks identical to her is standing on my porch." Delia's voice turned sharp and completely alert, all traces of sleep vanishing instantly. "Listen to me very carefully. Do not open that door. Do you understand me? Stay away from it. I'm calling the police right now, and then I'm driving over. Don't move until I get there." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in the hallway, clutching my phone, trying to convince myself that help was coming and everything would somehow be fine. But even as I thought it, I knew I couldn't just stand there, passively waiting. This person on the porch knew things. She knew my mother's phone number. She knew exactly how my mother knocked. She sounded precisely like my mother, down to the smallest vocal detail. Then her voice came through the door again, muffled but perfectly clear. "Sadie, I know you're scared. I know absolutely none of this makes sense, but I need you to trust me. Ask me something. Ask me something only I would know." I pressed my back harder against the wall. My heart was beating so fast it physically hurt in my chest. I thought rapidly about all the things I could ask. My mother's birthday, her maiden name, the hospital where she spent her final days. But anyone could find that basic information with a quick internet search. If this was some kind of elaborate scam, some cruel trick designed specifically to break me, they would have done their research thoroughly. I needed something else entirely, something private, something I had never told another living soul in my entire life. I moved closer to the door, just close enough that my voice would carry through the solid wood. "What did you say to me the night before my 8th grade graduation, when I was crying alone in the bathroom?" Silence. For a long moment there was absolutely nothing but silence, and I thought maybe I'd finally caught her. Maybe this imposter had reached the limit of whatever twisted game she was playing. Then she spoke, and her voice was gentle and sad. "I told you that your father leaving wasn't your fault. You asked me once if it was because you weren't a boy. You thought maybe he wanted a son instead of a daughter. You never brought it up again, but I never forgot. I told you that you were the only thing I ever did right in my entire life." My legs completely gave out. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold floor, back against the plaster, tears streaming down my face faster than I could wipe them away. I had never written those words down anywhere, had never spoken them to a therapist or a friend or a journal or anyone. That memory lived only inside my head, locked away in a place I never visited, because it hurt too much to remember. Whoever was standing on my porch had just unlocked it. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor. Could have been 30 seconds or 5 minutes. Time had stopped making any coherent sense. All I could hear was my own ragged breathing and blood rushing loud in my ears. The words she'd spoken kept echoing endlessly in my head, playing on a loop I couldn't stop. She knew. She knew the one thing nobody else in the entire world could possibly know. I got to my feet slowly, using the wall for support. My legs felt weak and unsteady, like I'd just run a marathon. I walked to the door and stood directly in front of it, staring at the locks my mother had installed so carefully years ago. 2 deadbolts and a chain. She always said you could never be too careful. I wondered distantly what she would think if she could see me now. Standing here in the middle of the night, about to open the door for someone who might be her ghost or her memory made flesh. My hands moved before my brain could talk me out of it. I turned the first deadbolt with trembling fingers, then the second. I slid the chain out of its track and let it hang loose against the door frame. Then I turned the handle and pulled the door open. She was standing right there, just a few feet away. The porch light from my neighbor's house cast a soft glow across her face, and I could see every single detail with devastating clarity. The fine lines around her eyes, the small scar on her chin from a cooking accident when I was 10. The way her gray hair curled slightly at the ends because she could never get it to lie completely flat, no matter what product she tried. She looked exactly like my mother. Exactly. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Couldn't do anything except stand there in the doorway staring at this impossible woman who wore my mother's face like it belonged to her. The cold February air rushed past her and into the house, but I barely felt it. "You're not real," I finally managed to whisper. "You can't be real. I watched her die. I held her hand while she took her last breath. I picked out the dress she was buried in. I stood at her grave while they lowered the casket into the ground." The woman's eyes filled with tears, and something about that genuine emotion broke me even more completely. Ghosts weren't supposed to cry. Hallucinations weren't supposed to look so heartbroken. "I'm real," she said gently. "I'm just not who you think I am. Can I please come inside? I'll explain everything, I promise." I stepped back without saying anything, and she walked carefully past me into the house. She moved slowly, looking around at the walls and furniture like she was seeing it all for the first time, but somehow also recognizing it. Her fingers brushed lightly against the back of the couch, and she paused in front of the mantel where I kept my mother's photograph in a silver frame. "She was beautiful," she said quietly, steadying the image. "I always wondered what she looked like." I closed the door behind her and leaned against it for support. "Who are you?" She turned to face me directly, and I could see the resemblance even more clearly now under the living room lights. Same height, same build, same exact way of holding her hands clasped in front of her body. But there were tiny differences, too, details I hadn't noticed through the peephole. Her eyebrows were slightly thinner. Her posture was a little straighter. She carried herself like someone who had lived an entirely different life. "My name is Marina," she said. "Marina Davis. And I'm your mother's twin sister." The words hit me like a physical punch to the chest. I shook my head violently, refusing to accept what she was saying. "That's impossible. My mother didn't have a twin. She didn't have any siblings except Aunt Delia. I would have known." "She didn't know about me," Marina said, her voice breaking. "Neither of us knew. We were separated at birth. Different adoptions, different families, different states entirely. I grew up in Vermont with parents who loved me, and I never knew I had a sister until 6 months ago." She reached carefully into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it slowly and held it out toward me with shaking hands. It was a DNA test result from one of those ancestry websites I'd seen advertised constantly. The paper showed a match. A 99.98% probability of full sibling relationship with someone named Renata Monroe. "I found her too late," Marina continued, her voice thick with grief. "By the time I finally tracked her down, she was already gone. I missed her by 3 years. 3 entire years, Sadie. I had a sister my whole life, and I never got to meet her. Never got to hear her voice, or hold her hand, or tell her I existed." I took the paper from her trembling hands and stared at the numbers. They blurred as tears filled my eyes. This woman wasn't a ghost, wasn't a hallucination, or a scam artist, or some cruel trick designed to torture me. She was my mother's other half, the piece that had been missing all along without anyone knowing. "The phone number," I said, my voice coming out hoarse. "How did you get her old phone number?" Marina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I contacted the phone company months ago. Told them I was settling her estate and needed the number reactivated for official records purposes. They believed me without much question. I just wanted something that connected me to her, anything at all. I never meant to scare you like this. I've been watching your house for weeks, trying to find the courage to introduce myself properly." She took a shaky breath. "Tonight I saw your lights go off and I panicked. Called before I could stop myself. I'm so sorry." I looked at her face again, searching desperately for my mother in her features. She was there. She was everywhere I looked. The sound of sirens suddenly broke the silence between us. Red and blue lights flashed through the front window, painting the walls in alternating colors. A few seconds later came a loud knock at the door, and I heard Aunt Delia's voice calling my name frantically. I opened the door to find her standing there with 2 police officers behind her, her face pale with terror. "Sadie, are you okay? What's happening? Who's in there with you?" I stepped aside so she could see Marina standing quietly in the living room. Delia froze completely in the doorway. Her mouth fell open. She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself, and I watched the color drain from her face entirely. She looked like she'd just seen a ghost, which I suppose she genuinely thought she had. "Oh my God," she whispered, barely audible. "Renata?" "No," I said quietly. "Her name is Marina. She's Mom's twin sister." What followed was the longest night of my entire life. The police officers took detailed statements from all 3 of us, while Delia sat on the couch in stunned, speechless shock. Marina explained everything again from the beginning, showing the DNA results and an old photograph she carried carefully in her wallet. It was faded and worn at the edges from years of handling. 2 baby girls in matching yellow onesies lying side by side in a hospital bassinet. On the back, someone had written in careful handwriting that I recognized immediately as my grandmother's. Renata and Marina together always. Delia couldn't stop crying. She kept saying she had no idea, that their mother had never mentioned anything about twins, that she couldn't believe this secret had been buried for so many decades. I sat beside her and held her hand while she processed the shock, understanding exactly how she felt, because I was feeling the identical, overwhelming emotions. The officers finally left around 4 in the morning after determining that no actual crime had been committed. Just a family reunion that had happened in the strangest, most terrifying way possible. Marina apologized again for scaring me so badly, and this time I completely believed her. I could see the deep regret in her eyes, the desperate loneliness of someone who had spent her entire life feeling incomplete without understanding why. In the days that followed, Marina and I began the slow, careful work of getting to know each other. She told me about her life in Vermont, where she'd worked as an elementary school teacher for 30 years before retiring. She'd been married once to a man named Richard, who died of a heart attack 8 years ago. They never had children, something she said she'd always regretted deeply. She showed me pictures of her house, her garden, her 2 cats named Pepper and Sage. She liked crossword puzzles and old movies and lavender tea, which made me smile through tears because my mother had loved all of those exact same things. I told her everything about my mom, about the Sunday pancakes and the Friday night movies and the silver spoon she gave me at graduation. I told her about the cancer and the hospital bed in the living room, and the way my mother watched the cardinals like they were old friends visiting. Marina listened to every single word with tears streaming down her cheeks. She was grieving someone she'd never met, mourning a lifetime of memories she would never get to make. 4 days after that strange, impossible night, the 3rd anniversary of my mother's death arrived. Marina and I drove to the cemetery together in the early morning light. The grass was still wet with dew, and the air smelled clean like rain. We stood in front of my mother's headstone, side by side, neither of us speaking for a long time. Finally, I broke the silence. "Mom, this is your sister. She found her way back to us." Marina placed a small bouquet of lavender on the grave with trembling hands. "I wish I could have known you," she said softly to the stone. "But I'm going to take care of your daughter. I promise you that." We stayed there for almost an hour, talking to my mother like she could somehow hear us. Maybe she could. I don't know what I believe about those things anymore. When we finally got back to my car, Marina hugged me tight. It felt strange and familiar at the same time, like holding on to a piece of my mother I thought I'd lost forever. Before she let go, I whispered in her ear, "To the spoon and back." She pulled away and looked at me with confusion in her red eyes. I smiled through my tears. "I'll explain everything. We have time now, all the time in the world." Grief had convinced me that I would never hear my mother's voice again. I thought that part of my life was permanently closed, sealed away in memories that would only fade with time. But I was wrong. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It just finds new ways to reach you, new forms to take. Sometimes it shows up on your porch at 2 in the morning, wearing your mother's face and carrying secrets that were buried for decades. Marina visits me every month now. She's teaching me how to garden the way she learned in Vermont. I'm teaching her how to make my mother's blueberry pancakes from the recipe I memorized. We're building something new out of something that was lost, creating a family from pieces we didn't know existed. And I think my mom would be proud of both of us. I think she's watching somehow, smiling at the thought of her daughter and her sister finally finding each other. Some people come into our lives exactly when we need them most. We just have to be brave enough to open the door.